And so with that, next, I'd like to invite Dr. Latonya Jackson to come up. She's our first keynote speaker today. Dr. Latonya Jackson is a native of Lawtell. Did I say that right? Lawtell? Lawtell, okay. A small rural town in Southwest Louisiana. She's an ecotoxicologist by trade and an assistant professor of biology at the University of Cincinnati. Dr. Jackson's research focuses on aquatic toxicology, where she studies the effects of pharmaceuticals, contaminants, and toxins in freshwater fish. She's a graduate of the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, where she received her doctorate in environmental and evolutionary biology with an emphasis on ecotoxicology. Dr. Jackson is a proud wife and mother and wants to make our environment a better and safer place for future generations to enjoy. She's passionate about sharing her knowledge and her research about how to keep our environment and aquatic systems safe for all to enjoy. She's a fervent advocate for environmental and aquatic issues and believes that it is our responsibility as human beings to take care of our home, the earth. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jackson.
Hi, good morning. I normally don't stand behind a podium when I speak, so you all have to excuse me because I'm used to walking around. Because, that's what I do. So I'm Dr. Latonya Jackson, as she said, and today I'm going to talk to you about CECs, in particular EDCs. So the title of my talk, there's something fishy going on here, and I'm going to take you on a tale of, it's going to be a twisted one too, of CECs, fish, and the human race. All right, so usually when I give these talks, I like to pay homage to the people that came before me and brought me here. So this is part of my family. I come from a huge family, and this beautiful queen that's circled is my mother, and she's the matriarch of the family, and she just turned 94. So my family actually looks more like this. This is how big we are. Now, this is not a picture of my family, but it pretty much covers who we are. And also, this is my father, and he is the reason that I fell in love with the environment and who I am today. So exactly who am I? So before I take you on this twisted tale, you have to know a little bit about me. So I am just a little country girl from Lawtell, Louisiana. It's a very rural area. It's not even on the map, so I had to pinpoint it on the map for you. It's south, probably, I would say mid-South Louisiana, and with only about 1,200 people in the whole town. So everybody knew everybody. So I'm also the same little country girl who fell in love with one of the baddest women, I think, in history, which was Harriet Tubman. And Harriet Tubman taught me that every dream begins with a dreamer. And always remember, you have within you the strength, patience, and passion to reach for the stars and to change the world. So when I first heard that, and I was a very young girl when I heard that, I just thought that I could change the world. And then I wanted to be Harriet Tubman and change the world until I learned about George Washington Carver, who said that education in the broadest of truest sense will make an individual seek to help all people, regardless of race, regardless of color, regardless of condition. So after that, I was like, well, I want to be the female version of George Washington Carver, as well as be part Harriet Tubman. So I think I became both. And, and I will share my quote with you here a little bit later, and you'll see why. So how did I get involved in science? Simple. When I was young, and I'm aging myself here, for those of you who ever watched Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, yeah, I did that when I was younger. That's all I watched. So while my cousins and everybody was watching, all their night shows and everything else, I was on Mutual of Omaha Wild Kingdom. I was an avid 4-H'er. My favorite TV show was Electric Company, PBS, and I did all types of science fairs and everything else. But my love for science began in my first class in science, which was in the 2nd grade. I knew then that I would be a scientist. So I went on, I graduated, and I'm from Louisiana, from South Louisiana. So, hey, University of Louisiana, Lafayette. I went there and got my bachelor's degree, but I didn't know what I wanted to do after that. I was like, oh, I want to save the environment, but I want to save people. So my dream job was going to be CDC or something like EPA. Well, decided to get a job doing one or the other. I didn't get the job at the zoo, so I got the job doing research at Tulane University, where I looked at highly addictive drugs and how it affects the brains, and also otolaryngology. And just as I was getting into it, Hurricane Katrina hit, destroyed just about everything in New Orleans, and including the lab that I was working in. So stayed at Tulane, they rebuilt, and I joined a different lab where I looked at cancer research. And it was here that I learned that for cancers are affecting Black women and causing deaths in Black women way more than they were causing in any other race. And that these cancers tended to be triple negative cancers, and that they were that Black women were dying at an alarming rate compared to other races of women. So after that, I was learning that a lot of these cancers were caused by estrogens and environmental estrogens, plant estrogens. And then I was like, that's it. That's the thing I want to do. So I was looking for something that would allow me to save the environment and save people at the same time. And that was ecotoxicology. And lo and behold, the only place in my state that had an ecotoxicologist was my alma mater. So I was back at the University of Louisiana, Lafayette, where I got my PhD. And while I was there, I started to work with fish. Now, the fish that I worked with were live-bearing fish, and still work with live-bearing fish. So most fish species are egg layers, and they lay thousands of eggs. They're out in the environment, so you expect them to get exposed to contaminants. But live-bearing fish, the embryos are growing inside of their bodies, so you wouldn't necessarily expect that they would be exposed to contaminants. So I wanted to see if live bearing was actually a safer mechanism and how that would translate into human subjects. So with my research, it has taken me to a lot of places, and I found out that I loved it, absolutely loved it. So it's taken me to places like my very first job before I got out of school, Philander Smith College, a small college in Arkansas. And I started building my lab and my research there. But then a more toxic state called, came recruiting at Ohio. And unfortunately, it's more toxic, but I could not pass up that offer because Ohio is pretty toxic. So when the University of Cincinnati came calling, I went running. So while there, I continued on and was studying pharmaceuticals. And pharmaceuticals are something in the environment that is not regulated by the EPA. And this is something that a lot of people do not know. So if it goes down the toilet, or whenever people are taking medicines and they urinate and defecate and all that is going into the domestic treatment waste centers, all of that is not regulated as far as how much is allowed to be out in the environment. Surprising, isn't it? Well, within my research, I've had students come through, and for me, most of the students that have come through my lab have been marginalized students who come from environments that are overburdened by these contaminants that I'll be talking to you about. Now, my favorite contaminant, I should say, is not saying that in a good way, but are estrogens. Remember, I learned that estrogens were causing a lot of cancers and doing many bad things to women in my cancer research. So I wanted to. All right, so those studies were done back in 2012 and 2009 from the US. Everything else since then has been models. And in 2021, a research group actually did a study in 32 countries of 82 surface waters. And what they found was it's actually 0.1 nanograms per liter through 112 nanograms per liter. Doesn't sound like a lot, right? Now remember, we're not talking all estrogens, we're just talking ED2s. Keep that in mind. All right, so how does all of this ED2 get into the environment? I did tell you the different ways that EDCs get into the environment. Well, this, unfortunately, ladies, is the way that it's getting into the environment most. So there are over 842 million women worldwide today that actually use the pill. And birth control pills have been more widely used since it's more accessible to countries where it wasn't accessible before. The pill actually came into effect in the 1950s, where it was approved in the US in the late 50s, early 60s. And since then, the number of women that have used the pill have gone up. Now, just in 2009, that number was only over 100 million women. And we're in 2023, and that number has jumped this high. And actually, I got this number from 2021, so it's even higher than that now. So what happens is when women take the pill, you don't metabolize 100% of it. And when urinate or defecate, then it's going into the wastewater treatment plants, but in an inactive form, because the part that's not metabolized, it is in combination with proteins. So it is the sewer treatment plant that actually gets activated due to the treatment process. There are microbes that are breaking down these chemicals and breaking down these things that causes the ED2 to become activated again. But it's not just women that are on the pill for birth control that are causing this. We're postmenopausal women, menopausal women that are using ED2 as hormone therapy, and also men with prostate cancers have found that estrogens reduce the prostate cancer sizes. So, and some of you are probably wondering, okay, yeah, say nanograms per liter and all that. So what's wrong? All right, I'm going to tell you what's wrong with it, because when it gets into the environment, now it gets into my territory, my fish. So how it affects fish depends on whether the fish is male or female. So if it's female, then it's going to reduce the egg production in the egg-laying fish. So that may not seem like a great big deal, since fish tend to lay thousands of eggs, right? But the reduction in egg production actually has a huge impact. It decreases fertilization success and embryo vitality. So So just because it's reducing the amount of eggs, it's also reducing the chances of these eggs actually coming into fruition of a fish. It reduces the gonadosematic index. That means basically that the gonads of the female are the egg production, the egg size, and all that. It reduces that, which is also a body condition factor to let us know whether or not the fish is healthy. So it reduces the health of that fish and decreases fecundity. The female's not having as many offspring. And so it causes vitellogenin induction. That means that vitellogenin is an egg yolk precursor. If you're a male, you don't need to produce eggs, so you don't need egg yolk. So it induces this in males. Phenotypic changes. So some male fish, like beta fish, beautiful. They have beautiful colors. It's for sexual selection. And this also reduces those colors and the morphology of males that have abnormal testes development, and the prevalence of intersexuality, meaning that the males are not only producing sperm, but they're producing eggs as well.
Now, it's hard enough to deal with one, imagine having to deal with two. So, what I wanted to know, remember, I told live-bearing fish, so all the information I found was on live-bearing fish. So what I wanted to know is, what happens to a live-bearing fish whenever, there are enough eggs that are out there in the environment getting exposed? Well, and this is actually my fish. Okay. So, when I look out there, nothing, crickets. So I use the fish that we have that is widely spread in the southeast United States, Heterangia formosa, and the common name is killifish. So it's a freshwater fish and sexually dimorphic, meaning that the females, which is this side, is much larger than the males. And the females have a dot right here on the anal fin, and that lets me know that she's sexually developed, that she's full sexual development. Also, she practices superfetation, and I'll explain what that is in a second. The males are much smaller, and they have right here, you can barely see it, but their anal fins are fused together to form what's called a gonopodium. And it's like a hypodermic needle with a hook, where he uses the gonopodium, he thrusts it forward like this into the female's to deliver sperm, which I think of a very nice face. Sperm. But now being sexually dimorphic, the females don't actually like to mate with the males, so they're smaller, so they can get into her blind spot and do this. So the bigger they are, the more likely they'll be sick. So you don't want to be big. Now, the superfetation I was telling you about earlier basically means that in that one female's body, she has eggs in every stage of development. So she can have an offspring every day, every 3 days, every 5 days, but they'll be at different stages in her body. So as she has an offspring, another egg is there developing into a fish. Also, it's just so amazing that she can store sperm for 18 months. So once the male sneakily copulates with her, she doesn't need them again for another 18 months. So in my studies, this is what we found. So their breeding season in Louisiana is 8 months. So it's very warm there. Like right now, you guys are feeling some coolness. It's hot over there. And so at the end of 8 months, I exposed them chronically from birth to the end of the breeding season, because I wanted to see what was going to happen long term. And what we saw that the males were the exposed males, I exposed them to 5 and 25 nanograms per liter of ED2, which is environmentally relevant and low on the low end. They were so they were significantly larger than the unexposed. And the exposed females were significantly smaller than the unexposed females. And this makes a difference. Remember, I said that the males were smaller, right? And they needed to be smaller in order to be able to mate with the females. Also, the males becoming larger was a sign of feminization. The females being smaller has a huge impact as well, because they're already a small fish, 23 millimeters long for the grown adult female. So the bigger they are, the more offspring they can have. So the smaller you are, the less offspring. Now we wanted to see whether the weight correlated with what we were looking at as far as their growth. And what we saw was, although the exposed males were bigger, they didn't weigh more than the controls. And the females, they're supposed to do smaller females, weigh less. So we wondered why. Why would that be? So we did some histology, and what we found out was that at 5 nanograms per liter, and this is a normal, normal male testes. And sorry, I couldn't get that picture color in time, but normal male testes, and this is an intersex male testes. So what was going on with the males at 5 nanograms per liter was that they were producing eggs as well. And we think that they were allocating their energy into egg production and not so much into weight. But this phenomenon is not only been seen in fish, and if you remember earlier, I said egg-laying fish show this as well. But it's also been seen in wood frogs. I took a study from 2013, and it shows that, and this is in micrograms per liter, so this is much higher concentrations, but it showed intersex in wood frogs, and it's also been shown in African claw frogs that have been exposed to atrazine, an herbicide, and Dr. Tyrone Hayes showed that that in African claw frogs it causes feminization as well. So then I got excited in a bad way, but want to see if this E2 was causing like anything else to go on. So we looked at the time to sexual maturity, and we saw that those fish that were exposed, males and females, exposed to 5 or 25 nanograms of E2, they took longer to get to sexual maturity, and it was dose dependent. And also we looked at the number of offspring. So the number of offspring was reduced in the exposed fish, but that wasn't dose dependent. And number of broods per pair, basically what we said were every time there was a offspring having an event or a birthing event, we counted that as a brood, and those exposed fish were significantly lower broods. So then I wanted to know what happens to the babies. Happens to the baby fish. Well, I wanted to bring them out 16 weeks, so that we knew that they were sexually mature, and we wanted to see what was going on inside of them. Unfortunately, all of the exposed offspring died at about 7.5 weeks. And controls lived, so we knew that there was something very crazy going on there, and we're looking into more of that now. So I also wanted to look at like what's going on in the population. Okay, I see all this individual stuff, and just because you have individual endpoints doesn't mean that it translates that way into populations. So what I wanted to see was the ratio, the sex ratio of male-female populations. And what we saw, like at the beginning, when I started the populations with just babies and grew them up into their whole populations. And usually in the wild, you'll see them being at about 50-50. They're pretty cool. I don't know how they do it, but we saw almost the same thing in the lab, where initially when they became sexually mature, we had a 52.7, 47.3 female ratio in the controls. And also in the 5 nanogram per liter, it was already female skewed at 62.5, female to male. Then when at the end of the breeding season, both populations were skewed, but there's a reason. In the nature, at the end of the breeding season, the males literally stop eating. They concentrate just on breeding. So they're trying to breed with as many females as they can. And because they stop eating, they tend to be easy prey for predators, or in lab conditions, they just kind of die. So even though we saw the female skewed ratio there, it was even more so in the exposed population. I didn't expose the population to 25 nanograms per liter because I was doing all of these experiments at the same time because I wanted the same environmental conditions. So you can imagine I had no life. So I need to add to it. So when I saw that, I wanted to see, well, what was going on? life, what part of life was more affected when it came to ED2 exposure? Well, newborns and the males. I wasn't surprised, but I did think juveniles would be affected, but they weren't. So they were more affected by ED2 exposure than juveniles or females. Now, as far as the population growth and size of the population, we tracked that, and what we found was estrogen actually gave the populations a kickstart. So they started growing faster than or sooner than the control populations, but that didn't last long. By 5 months, and then you can start to see the difference there, and it was significantly different, significantly lower at the end of the breeding season. But we did notice that even though it was lower, it still followed the same trend as the natural population or the control population did. So we found that exciting, and then it was like, all right, so what does that have to do with humans? Well, we're trying to put it together, and the fact of the matter is, here's one thing that we know. ED2 can cause breast cancer or estrogens. I'm going to go to general estrogens now, but they have been linked to causing breast cancers. And although estrogens or ED2 can be used to shrink prostate cancer, exposure over long periods of time to estrogens has been linked to prostate cancers in men. Now, but that's not all that we found. So looking through the literature, I saw that in 1998, and this was in a conference, an environmental, I think it was environmental toxicology cancer type conference, that Dr. Susan Love, who was a surgeon, a cancer surgeon, and she was an author, she said, it is lifetime exposure to estrogen that has increased all cancer rates by 26% since 1980. She said this in 1998. Well, in 2008, Bill Beckman, an author for the Illinois Review, said that studies are also showing significant evidence for a link between environmental estrogens and the early onset of puberty in girls. Average age of menarche has fallen by 1.5 years since 1970. Well, this is a kind of opposite. They said this in 2008, but this is kind of opposite of what we found in 2018 with our fish, where it's saying that it's taking longer for them to become sexually mature. So we're like, okay, so let's see. Now, what's going on here? What can we do? What's into that? Well, we started to think that how often will you find just one contaminant in the environment? Like that, probably never. Okay, you're usually going to find a mixture. So we decided to look at treated wastewater, and whether you know it or not, a lot of people, and probably all of us in this room, have been exposed to it. And it's a major source of surface water contamination and a major source of CECs, EDCs, and just any kind of contaminant that you can think of. But it's highly dynamic. So it depends upon where the treatment plant is located, what type of treatment processes they use, and how many people they're servicing. And but there is usually over 60,000 plus toxic chemicals or pollutants within wastewater. And most of those are not regulated. Think about that. Most of them not regulated. So part of what's beyond the NPDES, which is National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, part of what beyond what they monitor are anti-inflammatory drugs, most pharmaceuticals, soaps, detergents, plasticizers, flame retardants, insect repellents. None of this stuff is regulated as to how much can get into the environment. Depth with effluent contamination, this is kind of what we think about when we think about now Like, what is a polluted environment look like? So you can have contaminant A. Contaminant A may have certain characteristics and you know what it does. But when you're mixing it with many other contaminants, as you see here, if you mix it with B, you have a different contaminant. If you mix it with D, you have a different contaminant, or all of them together, and you have a totally different contaminant mixture. And this could be additive, it can be synergistic or antagonistic. And we don't know because with over 60,000 contaminants in one spot in one water sample, how are we supposed to know which ones are going to be additive, synergistic, or antagonistic? So you look at the whole contaminant and toxicity. So why are we so concerned about that? Well, in the short term toxicity, so if you or an aquatic organism is exposed to this for a very short period of time, I say an hour or so. That can be, and it's usually remediating because you're in and you're out. And that can be remediated over time. But treated wastewater and its outflow has a lot of nutrients. So a lot of organisms are there for the long haul. And it's not like the outflow starts and stops. It's a continuous flow of treated wastewater or untreated, depending on where you are. So you're gonna have organisms that stay there. And then they become part of the food chain because smaller fish get in there, they eat bigger fish, eat the smaller fish, and so on. Right, and this can cause diseases, not just in the organisms, but in us as humans, such as hormonal diseases, and it also can influence our behavior. So, this is what's so concerning about that. For fish health, I've already talked to you about the reproductive problems. Also, now the immune system. So the fish's slime coat is part of their immune defense. And when they're exposed to CECs through treated wastewater, it alters that slime coat. So it affects their immune system, their metabolism, and we've already talked about their growth and development. So we started out just like we did with everything else with our other experiments, but this time we used different dilutions of the treated wastewater. We only went up to 85%, and the reason is because this is the only thing we found in literature that is for affluent dominant streams. So a lot of streams and creeks and even some parts of rivers are effluent dominant. So anything over 50% be that. So we looked at 10%, 35%, 50%, and 85%. And what we saw as far as survival, we only exposed adult female. What we saw as far as survival was that it didn't make a difference in 10%, actually 50% in control, but in 85 and 35%, it was significantly lower survival rates. So we're like, hey, it's not a dose dependent, we didn't know why. So we looked at the growth as far as the length and the weight. And what we saw was that those exposed to higher concentrations, they were bigger, which was good. They weighed more, but not significantly more than other exposed concentrations, except for the 50%. So we wanted to see why. We wanted to see if that was actually telling us that this fish was healthier because, you know, with all that it was in, who knows? Well, we did a more sensitive fish condition equation for the weight allocation and allometrics. So what we found there basically was that although they grew bigger and lengthened as they and had higher weights, they were not storing that weight as fats. That was fat storage, which is what you would expect in a very healthy fish. What was going on is basically like they were having all of these higher weights, they were not storing fat, so it's something constantly going in, and we haven't figured that out yet. We're still working on that. This is recent data. All right, so we wanted to know what was going on, how was it affecting their behavior. All right, and if you look here in the background, you see our predator here. It's a little gobblefish thing. So our fish are side fish. So what we were able to do was move our predator around the fish tank as we wanted to. We moved him horizontally and back and forth. Right here is our little hiding place for our fish. Our predator's line of vision was above the hiding place. So we expected that our fish would, try to avoid the predator in normal conditions, and which is what we saw. So we noticed in our first round of results that our controls moved more than anybody else. So we're like, oh, this is surprising. So then we actually looked at where the movement was occurring. So we saw that the controls were moving horizontally. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to blind anybody, but they were moving horizontally. So as we moved the predator one way, the control fish was going the other way. And as the predator was coming back, the control fish was going into the hiding place. So that's why it has so much movement. And it wasn't moving far, but it was going back and forth with the predator. And we saw that at 10 and 35% that they didn't show much movement horizontally, but the higher concentrations did. And then we looked at the vertical movement, and we noticed then that the controlled fish didn't move up and down a lot because they didn't want to move to the eyesight of the predator. And neither did the 35%, but all the rest did. As a matter of fact, some of these fish actually went to the predator. It was crazy. So we wanted to see like wherever they concentrated at the most. So here's our control. So you see where the bright spots are, that was where their movement happened the most. Now the predator's eye vision was somewhere, line of vision was about right here. So as you can see, the control stayed under the line of vision. 10% moved to stay mostly here, but it did have some risky behavior. At 35%, we see that it moved around a lot, but more so, okay, there we go. But more so toward the bottom, 50 and 85%, then look like it moved up a lot, but you have some bright spots where it's definitely in the line of vision of the predator. So, and now, sorry about that. And that was actually significantly different when we did the analysis. So the next thing we looked at, it was swim performance. Like, okay, how will these fish be able to get away from the predator? And so the swim performance, we looked at the average velocity swimming upstream against the current, and also the average distance, being able to keep that. And we saw here that at 10%, I don't know, treated wastewater kind of helped them out because they swam faster than all others, but also even the controls, but the higher concentrations, 50 and 85% were lower. And we also saw that the average distance that actually traveled per attempt, say to get away from the predator, was the distance was lower in the high concentrations, 35% and up. Now, again, we found all of this out. So what does that have to do with us? What does that have to do with humans? Well, this is where the environmental justice piece comes in, because where do you think all of these contaminants are going? Whose communities do you think they're going into? Whose backyards do you think they're in? Now, my lab is just doing a small portion of these studies. We're showing that risky behavior. Our lab is not the only one that's shown that. And we're showing that it's affecting reproduction, showing that it's affecting development. And the risky behavior showing that there's some neurological things that are going on. And we still have to figure out what that is, but we don't know. So The whole purpose of environmental justice is meant to protect overburdened and underserved communities from the harm caused by environmental crimes such as illegal dumping, pollution, and climate change. Who are these communities? BIPOC communities, Black, Indigenous, people of color, Native American communities and tribal reservations, economically strapped communities. I don't like to say low-income communities, but that's why, so my version of that is economically strapped communities. So all of these communities are being inundated with all of these different types of pollutants. Treated wastewater is only one. Okay, there are many more, and you all are scientists, so you know. But there's more to that story than this, because the EPA has finally admitted some things. What they've admitted is that they did a recent study on air pollution exposure in the United States. Well, it wasn't the EPA, but they actually took this information from the study that was done in 2021. And for the first time, this study found that it was race and ethnicity that was the more significant factor to exposure than low income. Now, prior to that, a lot of studies were saying that it didn't matter what the race was, it didn't matter what the ethnicity was of the community. What really mattered was whether the community was affluent as far as income or not. And this study took all of the, did a review of many studies before that and found that that was not accurate. And also that respiratory diseases, cardiovascular diseases, cancers, cognitive decline, and adverse birth outcomes, and so on, they were all affected by this. And this effect was happening just because the communities were communities of color. Now, in 2021, the EPA did its own analysis as well. And it showed that the most severe forms of climate change fall disproportionately upon underserved communities who are least able to prepare for and recover from heat waves, poor air quality, flooding, and other impacts. Why is this? Racial and ethnic minority communities are particularly vulnerable to the greatest impacts of climate change, which is expected to get worse in the future. And we see that it's already getting worse now. So, what does that mean? What does that mean for us as science? Well, we can hopefully eliminate some of these problems if there is more representation in science from the people from these communities. People like me. So, the EPA wasn't finished talking, they still have more to say. So, the EPA said that Black and African American individuals are projected to face higher impacts of climate change for all 6 of the impacts that they analyzed at the time in the report compared to any other demographic groups. Now, Native Americans, Alaskan Natives, Hispanics, Latinx, individuals or communities and Asian American communities are going to be hit as well. And all in different ways. And that should not even be an issue in our society today with all of our technology, with all of our advances. The one thing that we haven't advanced in is the representation of these communities that are most impacted. We haven't advanced in that in science, especially in the environmental sciences. I'm a Black woman. One of the reasons that I'm in this is because of this. Because I ask questions concerning my community that others may not ask, because others may not know. And just because doctors, medical doctors, and other people are like, well, it could be the diet, it could be this, it could be that. Doesn't matter if you're vegan, running all day, you know, and just eat organic and clean. If you're being exposed to thousands of contaminants on a daily basis, you're gonna fall victim to this. So, wanna know how to stop all of that? I'll let you know. Okay, so we made great strides in academia across the United States. There are more minorities, people of color, there are more underrepresented people going into STEM and by leaps and bounds. However, even though that's happening, the mindsets of non-minority professionals still has not caught up with that. So even though you have more underrepresented groups coming into this, they're being held back, they're being diverted into something else or doing other things because the mindsets haven't changed just yet. There's no room for us at the table. And when there is room, there's not room for our intellect. So in 2014, the Department of Education stated that the percentage of Black women enrolled in earning degrees in higher education was greater than any other race and gender groups. Also, percentage-wise, the number of Black women who received post-secondary degrees outpaced women of other groups as well. However, in spite of all of that, there is an ongoing negative depiction of Black women and minority women in science, in the news, in music, in television, in everything. And it needs to stop. So because of that, it's so ingrained into the minds and the attitudes of people globally, and it has been for centuries. And the only way to stop it is just to stop it. It's hurtful, it's harmful, and it has huge negative impacts on BIPOC, and not just BIPOC people. I've concentrated on that, but this also includes the LGBTQIA+ community, and it also includes the scientists with disabilities. So it has a huge negative impact on our lives, on our health, also on any opportunities that are there, of course. So at most conferences, right now, you hear that they're all about diversity, right? Okay. Well, my experience with that is this. For every conference I've gone to, except for this one, most of the diversity talks, most of the things that had to do with diversity were given by non-BIPOC women. And they concentrated only on gender diversity. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not against gender diversity. So, I mean, it's needed. But that's not the only diversity that there is. It's not the only diversity needed in science. There's a negative depiction of marginalized communities in those same presentations that are talking about diversity. In the same presentation and set discussions. And let me give you an example. I was at a conference and there was a speaker, she was non-BIPOC, and she was shown, doing her presentation. And at the end, all throughout the presentation, when she showed Black communities in particular, it was always slums. She showed 2 pictures at the end of 2 little girls. They were each on their own slide. There was a cute little white girl with an owl on her arm and thank you science. And then the Black girl came with her background, like she was in the worst conditions possible, with a dilapidated poster saying thank you science. So I did bring it to her attention, by the way, and I did let her know that in my community, that's not how we roll. That's not how we live. And you can find people from the highest intelligence and with a lot of money, and people that are poorest in every community. It doesn't just happen in the Black community. So, I told her to be careful how she's depicting my community, because that's not how we do. And the sad part about it is people accept that because it's done so much that you don't even notice it happening unless it's you. It's shameful. So is it acceptable or shameful? Yes. Neither. It's not acceptable and it is shameful. Yeah, so it's one of them. All right. And then she told me the thing that all too familiar with BIPOC scientists. I didn't know, like it was a blanket. I'm sorry. We're in a no age in the know. We have social media. We have everything to where you can be in the know if you really want to be. So that's not a blanket excuse. And it's not one that any of us should use. So it's very important to have BIPOC people, LGBTQIA plus people, disabled peoples in the environmental sciences, because we can look at the problems in a different way. We're asking the questions that we know. We're not just looking and assuming, we know. So is there a seat for me at the table? But not just a seat for me to be there so that you can say you have a BIPOC representative. Is there a seat for me in my inner life at the table? Well, according to SIPA in 2021, no. And this is why. There are approximately 71,661 environmental scientists in the US. 81.2% of those are white. 6.2% are Hispanic or Latinx. 5% are Asian. 3.1% are Black. Native American and Alaskan Natives, they don't even have 1%. Unknown, 3.7%, and LGBTQIA plus is 60% of all covered in all of those things. So why are we not getting into this? I'm going to tell you why, and I don't have a whole lot of time left, but our representation at the little bit that we have is not valued. We're still marginalized. We're not accepted. We're not valued. Lots of times we're not even respected. We're targeted whenever we do stand up for the rights and rights of our communities, as far as them being clean communities, them being communities of health. We're exhausted because we are doing our science, we're advocating, and we're fighting a system that's meant for us not to be in it. We're speaking out. Finally, we've always been speaking out, but now because of social media and everything else, we're able to speak out to more audiences. And we're here. We are. So yes, you want to end the climate change issues, you want to not have so many environmental justice issues, you need us. You need science, needs us. Environmental science needs BIPOC people. We need all of us at the table to mitigate the problems. All people, and more representation, and not just have us at the table to say that you're diverse. Have us at the table, listen. And we need to listen to you because you have a contribution as well. All right. Well, my time is up because I can talk all day. But the future is a very busy one. And please, in your scientific endeavors, and we're all here for the same cause. We're trying to save them. We're trying to save people. We're trying to save the world. And we all have the heart for it. But we all don't have the same insights into the communities that are being hit the hardest. So bring the scientists in who come from those communities. We know We know how our communities are shaped. We know what we're doing in there. We know because these are our communities. These are where we grew up. And these are where our families are still. So don't just invite us to the table. Listen to what we have to say, respect us, value us. It's so important. That's the only way we're going to solve the problem. So, told you I would get back to my quote. One day, either I'm going to be infamous or something, or notorious, but here's my quote. This is where I think I became Harriet Tubman and the female version of George Washington Carver. I am who I am, and I said what I said. I'm a Black woman, and I'm an environmental toxicologist. I don't have time for anyone's racism, bias, performative actions. It's not my job to educate you about your hangups concerning my race. That job is yours and yours alone. But I will have those hard, uncomfortable conversations with you whenever you're ready. So science should be one community, not separate. So let's make it one. So you can trust me, I'm a biologist. And here's my contact information for anyone that would like to get in touch with me. I'm on all of these things, although I'm not extremely active on all of these things. Like I said, you saw my research, I don't have a life most of the time. So, but I'm good at responding. So, thank you all.
Have you considered or explored biosolids in research?
Oh, this is fine. I thought about it, and honestly, it would take more students than I'm allowed to have. Yes, that's the only reason. Yes, that's the first thing I thought of. Because that's actually part of the sludge that they make sludge with that, and it's used as fertilizers on crops, and actually treated wastewater too in very arid areas are being used to fertilize our crops. And imagine you get it anyway. I mean, that is.
Oh, actually, interestingly, I'm on the biosolids panel, EPA Science Advisory Board, and that is something that EPA is developing for right now to start looking at certain key contaminants that are biosolids and uptake at farms and pastures, et cetera. So that sort of is happening, not exactly, on the endocrine structure, but some of those are, going to be evaluated. My question was about, I'm from Massachusetts, and we just started something called cumulative impact analysis that's focused on helping EJ communities like, have a voice and really understanding the impacts of new facilities being cited to meet air permits and looking at, socio-economic factors, really pushing outreach to the potentially impacted communities, looking at things like, existing asthma rates, and then starting to try and understand what the additional incremental impact is, taking into consideration sort of the baseline. And I was just curious, like, have you heard about, this sort of approach being taken in other places, or do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, in Cincinnati, I'm actually involved with 2 community groups, and we're doing something like that. I'm just their expert scientist, as well as I live in one of the communities. So we are actually we're giving the communities themselves the information that is needed for them to take the fight and have the voice. So my job on their community panels is the science behind it. And there are lots of other people. So as being on the panel, we actually go to the city council and, we advocate for the communities. And recently, and there was a city council meeting where they were gonna put, this artificial turf and, this marginalized community is baseball fields because they were like, oh, the grass is too much to be kept up and all of this, and they're like, okay, I'm like, it's full of PFAS, sorry. You're not having it, so gave the community, you know, pamphlets, we educated them about it, and for the meeting, when they were voting on this, the whole communities came out with all of their information and they were ready, and it didn't pass, so, yeah, there's a lot, like, and we're just, and then two community panels that I'm in, they're very small communities, but I've heard, like things like this and even more of what you said happening in the Cincinnati area in the larger, communities that are impacted, so. And because I wanna be a force, it's like, I hate to say no, but if I spread myself too thin, I can't be a good force for the people. So it's like right now I'm at 2. So once they get going, then I can, you know, go to different things.